Have you ever walked past someone sitting on the sidewalk? Someone who looked invisible to the rest of the world? Outside a grand hotel, where cars pulled up gleaming and guests walked in dress in luxury, sat a man most people didn't even glance at. His clothes were torn, his shoes barely holding together, and the lines on his face told stories of nights without shelter and days without warmth. People hurried past him. Some pulled their coats tighter, as if his very presence was an inconvenience. Others rolled their eyes, whispering that he didn't belong there. Not a single person stopped, except maybe you would have, or maybe, like most, you would have looked away. Because that's the thing about this world. Kindness is easy to speak about, but harder to live when no one's watching. And yet this man on the curb, this forgotten figure, wasn't who they thought he was. No, he was someone far more powerful. Someone who could change lives with a single decision. But on that night, he chose to be overlooked. He chose to be seen as nothing. Because what he was about to discover would test not just the hearts of his staff, but the very soul of his hotel. And it all began with one waiter behind the marble pillars and the golden chandeliers of that very hotel stood a man who owned it all. He was no ordinary businessman. He had built his empire brick by brick, from nothing but determination, sleepless nights, and a belief that hospitality wasn't about wealth, but about heart. And yet, over the years, something began to trouble him. Whispers reached his ears. Stories of staff treating guests differently. A warm smile for those in diamonds. A cold glance for those who seemed ordinary. He heard of shortcuts, complaints, and kindness being replaced by calculation. The hotel was thriving financially, but in his chest, the owner felt a weight. Had his staff forgotten the very values the hotel was built upon? So he made a decision no one would ever expect. He would leave behind the polished suits, the luxury car, and the title of owner. He would walk out those glass doors and come back not as the man everyone bowed to, but as a beggar, a stranger on the street. Why? Because when people think no one important is watching, their true selves come alive. Greed shows its teeth. Cruelty finds its voice. And kindness, well, kindness glows brighter than ever. This was no game for him. It was a test, not of profits, not of procedures, but of people. And as he pulled on torn clothes, dusted his hands with dirt, and stepped out into the night, the fate of his entire staff rested in the way they would treat a man they believed had nothing. But what he didn't know was that one act of quiet kindness from the most unexpected person would change everything. The hotel was breathtaking. Marble floors polished so bright, they reflected the chandeliers above like pools of light. Tall glass windows framed the skyline, and fountains in the lobby whispered elegance with every drop of water. Guests arrived in black cars, stepping out in tailored suits and glittering dresses. Bellboys rushed forward, smiling, carrying luggage as if it were a crown jewel. From the outside, it was perfection, a palace of hospitality, a temple of service. But behind the shine, something else was growing. Watch closely, and you'd see the subtle cracks. A doorman offering a deep bow, only to the guest with a diamond watch. A receptionist whose smile seemed rehearsed, and quickly faded when she thought no one was watching. A waiter who carried trays with grace, but rolled his eyes the moment a guest asked for something extra. Kindness was still there, yes, but not the effortless, genuine kind. It was the kind that came with calculation, with a hidden thought. What can I gain from this person? For wealthy guests, there was warmth, attention, even admiration. But for those who looked plain or seemed unimportant, politeness was replaced with impatience. Service became an obligation, not a calling. And the owner, disguised as a beggar, saw every detail, every forced smile, every dismissive glance, every cold shoulder. The staff didn't know they were being watched. They thought this ragged man outside the door was beneath notice. But in truth, their actions were painting the very picture of who they were. And for some of them, that picture was far from flattering. Not all hearts were hardened, and soon, one man's quiet kindness would break through the glitter and glass, shining brighter than the chandeliers themselves. The first night, he sat outside those glass doors. No one knew who he was. To them, he was just a beggar, a man with dirt on his hands, clothes that hung loose on his frame, and eyes that seemed tired of being unseen. One by one, the staff passed by. The bellboy glanced at him once, then quickly looked away, as though even eye contact would slow him down. A receptionist, stepping out for a quick break, wrinkled her nose and whispered under her breath, "Why do they let people like this stay near the hotel?" Another waiter brushed past, carrying trays toward a guest's car. The beggar softly asked for water. The waiter didn't even stop walking. He waved his hand dismissively, like swatting away a fly. Some staff didn't just ignore him. They mocked him. "Go find a shelter," one muttered. "You don't belong here." Their words stung, not because he was truly poor, but because he realized something deeper. This is how they would treat anyone they believed could give them nothing. And in that moment, the hotel owner, disguised as a beggar, saw more truth than any report could ever reveal. He felt the sting of arrogance, the coldness of false hospitality, the emptiness behind practiced smiles. But then, as he lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of rejection, he wondered, would anyone see him differently? Would anyone treat him as more than a burden on the hotel's perfect image? For now, he remained invisible, but destiny had already placed one young man on a path toward him, and that meeting would change everything. And then, when it seemed like no one would ever notice him, a waiter, Ethan Cole, stopped mid-step. They weren't hurried. They weren't filled with annoyance. They slowed down, as if the person behind them actually saw the man on the ground. It was a young waiter. His uniform wasn't perfectly pressed. His shoes carried the wear of long shifts. But his eyes carried something rare. Gentleness. He didn't look down at the beggar with disgust. He didn't look through him, like most others did. Instead, he crouched, lowering himself so their eyes could meet. "Sir, are you hungry?" The words came out soft, careful, not pitying, not mocking, just human. The beggar, the hotel owner in disguise, hesitated. No one had asked him that all night, not once. The waiter didn't wait for an answer. He disappeared inside for a moment, then returned with a simple glass of water, cold, fresh, placed into the beggar's trembling hands. "You look tired. Drink this. I'll see if I can bring you something to eat." It wasn't much, just water, just a moment of kindness. But for the man who owned the very hotel behind those golden doors, it meant everything. Because in that instant, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't mocked. He wasn't unwanted. He was simply treated like a person. And as the young waiter gave a small smile, before hurrying back to his duties, the owner's heart stirred. Maybe, not all was lost within these walls. And he didn't know it yet, but this waiter's quiet act of kindness was only the beginning. The first glass of water wasn't the last. The next evening, the waiter appeared again, this time carrying a small plate, a piece of bread, a bowl of soup still warm from the kitchen. He looked around quickly, making sure no supervisor was watching, then placed it gently into the beggar's hands. "Eat before it gets cold," he whispered with a smile. The beggar, the hotel owner in disguise, felt a lump rise in his throat. It wasn't the food itself. It was the care and the gesture, the thought behind it. Every night after that, the waiter returned, sometimes with leftovers, sometimes with fruit he had bought himself, from a street vendor on his way to work. And it wasn't just food. On one chilly night, when the city winds cut through the streets, the beggar shivered against a stone wall. The waiter noticed. Without hesitation, he slipped off his own thin jacket and draped it over the man's shoulders. "It's not much, but it's warmer than nothing." Those words, so simple, yet filled with a generosity that couldn't be taught, melted the coldness that had grown in the owner's heart. After watching so many others turn away, no one had asked the waiter to do this. There was no audience, no promise of reward. It was kindness for the sake of kindness. And the more the owner watched him, the more he began to realize this young man wasn't just serving food in a hotel. He was serving humanity. What the waiter didn't know was that each small act was being written into a story that would change his life forever. Night after night, the waiter kept returning. At first, it was just food, a jacket, a quiet smile left behind. But soon, something deeper began to grow. On slow evenings, when the hotel buzz had calmed and the streets outside grew still, the waiter would sit beside the beggar, not above him, not standing, towering over, but right there on the cold curb, as equals. And in those quiet moments, he talked, not in a way that asked for pity, but in the way someone speaks. When they've been carrying too much inside, for far too long, he spoke of his family, how he worked double shifts to help his younger sister through school, how his mother's health bills were piling higher than his paycheck could ever reach. He laughed too, telling small stories about clumsy moments in the kitchen or difficult guests who demanded too much. But behind every laugh was a weariness, a tiredness he never showed inside the hotel, but one the beggar could clearly see here, in the flickering glow of the streetlights. And still, the kindness never left his voice. "Life can be heavy," he once said softly, staring down at his worn hands. "But I believe you don't lose anything by being good to people, even when it's hard." The beggar, the owner in disguise, listened in silence, every word sinking deeper than the waiter could ever imagine, because what the young man didn't know was that this stranger beside him wasn't just hearing his story. He was weighing it, remembering it, letting it reshape everything he thought he knew about his staff and about humanity itself. What began as small talk was slowly turning into something much greater, a bond, one built not on appearances, not on wealth, but on simple, unshakable compassion. Kindness rarely goes unnoticed, and in the hotel's glittering halls, whispers began to spread. Some staff had seen the waiter slip food outside. Some had caught him sitting on the curb, sharing moments with the beggar no one else cared for. At first, it was gossip, quiet laughter, snide remarks behind his back. But soon, it turned sharper. Supervisors pulled him aside, cold voices, furrowed brows. "You're wasting time," one said. "This isn't a charity," snapped another. "You're paid to serve our guests, not strays on the street." The waiter lowered his gaze, his hands tightening on the serving tray he carried. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. But later that evening, when he saw the beggar shivering outside, he still stepped out, still brought him food, still treated him with the dignity others thought was foolish. And for that, the scolding grew harsher. Warnings, threats, even laughter from his own co-workers, mocking him for playing hero to someone who had nothing to give back. But the waiter, he stood firm. In one moment of quiet defiance, when told to stop wasting his efforts, he simply replied, "He's a human being. Everyone deserves respect, even if the world decides to look away." Those words hung heavy in the air, so simple, so pure, and while his colleagues rolled their eyes, shaking their heads at his naive heart, the beggar listening nearby, the owner himself, felt something shift inside. For in that moment, he wasn't just witnessing kindness, he was witnessing courage. And sometimes, courage speaks louder than any luxury. From his place on the cold sidewalk, the man who owned it all remained silent. He had seen enough to know the truth. The polished marble, the golden chandeliers, the rehearsed smiles inside the hotel. They were a mask that cracked the moment people thought no one important was watching. He remembered the scorn in the receptionist's eyes, the way the waiters walked past as if he were invisible, the harsh words from supervisors who valued rules more than compassion. It stung, not because he was hurt as a beggar, but because he realized this was the culture his empire had grown into, one he had sworn it would never become. And yet, through the cracks in the stone, there was light, the young waiter's kindness. Night after night, act after act, stood out like a flame refusing to be extinguished. Food when he was hungry, a jacket when he was cold, time when no one else would spare a single moment. The owner saw more than gestures. He saw sincerity, sacrifice, a rare kind of goodness that couldn't be faked. And in his heart, a decision was forming. He had disguised himself to test his staff, but this test was no longer about business. It had become something greater, something personal. He knew the time was coming soon, the moment when masks would fall and true hearts would be revealed. The owner had seen enough kindness to know the waiter's heart was true, but still, a question lingered. Was this compassion only for simple moments? A glass of water, a bowl of soup, a jacket on a cold night? Or would it remain when things grew heavier? When kindness came at a cost? And so, he decided to test it. One last time. That evening, as the city lights dimmed and the streets grew quiet, the beggar appeared weaker than ever. He clutched his chest, his breathing shallow. A cough rattled from his throat. Loud, painful, unignorable. He let his body sag against the wall, as though every ounce of strength had left him. Most people walking by hurried their steps. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted the burden. But the waiter, he stopped, eyes wide with worry. He rushed to the beggar's side. He placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Sir, are you all right?" "Stay with me." The beggar wheezed, his voice faint. "Medicine? I can't afford it." The waiter hesitated only for a breath. Then, without a second thought, he reached into his own pocket, pulled out the little cash he had, and with urgency, he dashed across the street to a pharmacy, returning minutes later with medicine, a bottle of water, and trembling hands that held it out like a lifeline. "Take this. Please. You'll be okay." He didn't ask for anything in return. Didn't think about the money he had just spent, the meals he might now have to skip, the bills that would wait even longer. All he cared about was helping a man he thought had nothing. And in that moment, the owner knew this wasn't just kindness. This was sacrifice. The kind of heart you could build an entire future upon. The test was over, and the waiter had passed in the most human way possible. The next morning, the hotel buzzed with its usual rhythm. Guests checked in. Suitcases rolled across the marble floor. Staff hurried from one corner to another, smiles stretched thin under pressure. And then the front doors opened. But this time, it wasn't a frail beggar who shuffled in. It was a man, tall, commanding, dressed in a crisp suit, his shoes polished until they caught the light. Heads turned instantly. The staff whispered. The manager rushed forward, bowing deeply, his voice dripping with respect. "Sir, welcome back. We weren't expecting you today." The waiter froze. His heart skipped. He recognized the face, but he couldn't place it until the man's eyes met his. The same weary eyes he'd seen on the sidewalk, the same trembling hands he had steadied, the same weak voice that had begged for medicine. It was him, Alistair Whitmore, the owner of the hotel, disguised as the beggar no one saw. Only now, he stood not as a man in rags, but as the owner of the hotel itself. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Employees exchanged bewildered looks. The waiter's breath caught in his throat. "How?" Alistair's voice rang out, steady but filled with gravity. "For days," he said, "I stood outside these very doors. Hungry, cold, invisible, and I watched." He let the silence stretch, his gaze sweeping over the staff. "I watched how my own people treated a man they thought had nothing, and I will never forget what I saw." The manager shifted nervously. Some staff lowered their eyes, ashamed, but then the owner's gaze softened and landed on the waiter. "Except for you." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't move, didn't breathe. "You," the owner continued, gave me food when others turned me away. You gave me warmth when others gave me scorn. And when you thought my life was slipping away, you gave me your last bit of money. The lobby was silent now, every whisper gone, every eye fixed on the young man. Who had thought he was helping a beggar, never knowing he was lifting the very hand that owned the ground beneath his feet? The waiter swallowed hard, his voice small. I was just doing what felt right. The owner smiled faintly. No, you were doing what was human, and that is priceless. The disguise had fallen. The truth stood in the open, and the waiter's kindness was about to change everything. The lobby remained silent. Not a glass clinked. Not a breath stirred. Everyone waited for the owner's next words. And then he stepped closer to the waiter. You thought no one noticed your kindness. The owner said softly, but I did. I noticed every single moment. The waiter lowered his head, embarrassed by the sudden attention. I didn't do it for a reward, sir, he murmured. I just couldn't stand by and watch someone suffer. The owner's eyes softened. Exactly. That's why this reward belongs only to you. Gasps echoed again. The staff leaned in, hearts racing. The owner straightened, his voice carrying through the hall. From this day forward, you will no longer serve tables. You will sit at them as the new manager of this hotel. The waiter's knees nearly buckled. His lips parted in disbelief. Manager? Him? But I'm not qualified, he stammered. I have no education, no background. The owner raised a hand, stopping him. You have what matters most. Integrity, compassion, the kind of heart that can guide people better than any degree ever could. Tears welled in the young man's eyes. Around them, staff looked stunned. Some clapped hesitantly. Others bowed their heads in shame, realizing how differently they had treated the man in rags. The owner continued, his voice thick with feeling. Money can build walls of marble. Power can fill a room with silence. But kindness is what makes these walls worth standing. And you, my boy, have reminded me of that truth. The waiter's chest rose and fell. Overcome, unable to speak, the owner placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Your life changes today, because kindness always returns. Sometimes quietly, sometimes louder than you could ever imagine. And in that moment, the boy who had once worried about rent, who had given away his last coin to a stranger, stood not as a servant, but as a man whose kindness had rewritten his destiny. The story could have ended with a signature on a promotion letter, or with applause echoing through the hotel lobby. But the truth is, it ended somewhere deeper. It ended in the quiet realization that kindness, the small, often unnoticed kind, has the power to move mountains we cannot see. Ethan never planned to impress anyone. He never thought his simple act of sharing food, his words of comfort, his quiet respect for someone others ignored, would change his life. And yet, those very moments, the ones he might have forgotten himself, became the reason his future opened in ways he never imagined. Think about it. Every day, we cross paths with strangers. Some wear suits, some wear rags. Some seem important, some seem invisible. But underneath, every one of them carries a story. Every one of them carries pain, hope, and humanity. And sometimes, the smallest gesture, a smile, a kind word, a helping hand, becomes the light someone desperately needed. The hotel owner, a man surrounded by wealth and power, could have hired the best manager money could buy. But what he searched for was something money could never purchase. He was searching for heart, and he found it in the one person willing to give without asking anything in return. So maybe this story isn't just about a beggar, or a waiter, or even a wealthy hotel owner. Maybe it's about us. It's about the choices we make when no one's watching, the moments when the world tells us to look away, but our hearts whisper, help. Because in the end, it's not the size of the act, but the sincerity behind it that can alter the course of a life. Sometimes our own. So tonight, when you step out into the world, remember this story. Remember that the person before you, whether polished in gold or wrapped in rags, may be carrying a lesson for you. And remember, whether you're an Alistair or an Ethan, kindness never truly disappears. It finds its way back. Always. And if stories like this touched your heart, don't let it end here. Join us again for more tales that remind us of the power of kindness, love, and hope. This is Heartfelt Tales TV, where every story is a gentle reminder to carry a little more light into the world. Until next time,